Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with one co-host this week.
Joe Lalo.
Jeff is traveling after Christmas, was just yesterday, so we were allowing him to have a travel day. But we've got another Jeffrey here on the show for you today, Jeffery H. Haskell, who kind of got his start in the last year or two and has been selling pretty well. So we're going to talk about successfully launching as a new author. And he also has some experience writing in a couple of different Kindle Worlds. So we're going to ask him if that was actually worth doing. But for a quick intro, Jeffery is an award-winning journalist and USA Today best-selling author. He's a lifelong lover of comic books and science fiction, and he owns his geek status by quoting aliens in Star Trek at any given opportunity. When he realized he could make a living writing about his obsessions, he jumped at the chance. He's the author of 2 and soon-to-be 3 books in the Full Metal Superhero series, and as I said, he's also done a couple Kindle Worlds adventures. So like I said, most of his stuff's come out this last year or so. So we're going to ask him how he got started and how he's selling books. Hi, Jeff. Do you want to do a better introduction or tell them about Spider-Man, maybe?
I would like to point out that you didn't mess that up at all.
I'm sure I did. There was a stumble.
No, I didn't hear anything. You were perfect. Thank you guys so much for having me. This show is something I watch all the time, so it's really terrific to be here in person. Spider-Man thing. It's really interesting. I learned to read on Amazing Spider-Man comics. I was going to Oregon when I was 5 years old, and Oregon doesn't have a preschool. At the time, this was in the 70s, they didn't have preschool, so you had to be 7 years old to be in the first grade. And so I spent the next 2 years being homeschooled, essentially, by the state, which is weird. But the stuff they gave you to read was just awful, and I would go to the store and I'd buy the 10-cent, 15-cent Amazing Spider-Man comics, and wanting to know what was happening is what made me learn to read. So that's what the full Spider-Man bit about is. I love Spider-Man. He's my absolute favorite superhero. He's the everything to me when it comes to fiction. It's like the best story ever. So that's why I reference Spider-Man a lot.
My friend just, she sews and she made Spider-Man pajamas for her nephew. So he's 7. Apparently Spider-Man is still cool, still in, never goes away.
Well, great stories are like that. They stay around forever. So it's a good lesson. Learn what made Spider-Man good and copy that, which I try to do, to be honest. The Full Metal Superhero is kind of the genesis of that.
Well, what kind of got you started? It sounds like you started out in journalism. What made you turn to fiction and getting your work out there?
It's kind of interesting. It's kind of a long story. I mean, like everybody else, right? You want to tell stories your whole life. And I was never really good in school, so I never really thought being a writer was something I'd get to do. I read a lot, though. I've always read a lot. I got kicked out of class once for reading too much. When I was growing up and as an adult, the writing window never really happened to me. But I needed, like a lot of writers, I needed a way to tell a story. I needed to be creative. And like a lot of writers who write science fiction and fantasy, I love Dungeons and Dragons and Shadowrun and all the other, RPGs. And so from about the time I was 13 until just a couple of years ago when I stopped having time to do it, I was always the DM. I was always the one telling the stories. So I got a really great grasp of storytelling and pacing, which is one of the big compliments I usually get on my writing is, wow, it was really great pace. And being a DM lets you kind of see when people get bored with a story and, how to go on from there. So I did that for years, and I tried to get published a couple of times back when there was no self-publishing. I was in the Army in the 90s, and when I got out, I tried to submit a couple of books to a few different publishing houses, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and it was riddled with spelling errors and no formatting whatsoever. So there was no real chance of that happening. And then I just sort of forgot about it for a while. And a few years ago, I lost my job at T-Mobile and started going back to school to do something else because we were in the middle of that big depression and there was no work for somebody who didn't have a degree. And so I decided to go back to school and get my degree. And while I was in school in 2011, I stumbled across this great book called The Confessions of a D-List Supervillain by Jim Bernheimer. I think that's how you say his name. I'm sorry, Jim, if you're watching this. He's a really funny writer. He's traditionally published. And this was just one of his small press books, and I just like, wow, you can write superhero fiction? I didn't know. And then I read Wearing the Cape by Marion G. Harmon and X Heroes by Peter Klein. And Peter Klein's like I won't say he's a big deal screenwriter, but he's kind of a big deal screenwriter. And they were all superhero books. And so I tried my hand at a superhero book. I was really excited because, again, I've read comics my whole life. Love Spider-Man, love DC and Marvel both. So I'm an equal opportunity comic book person. So Marvel tends to tell stories that I like better. And yeah, so I wrote a book, showed it to my wife. I was so proud of it, and she looked at me and said, "Oh, that's nice, honey." And then I reread it a couple times and realized that I did not do a very good job on it. And I thought maybe that was it. And then I had the bug at that point, so I kept writing. And there's this website called Upwork where you can get jobs on, and there's lots of writing work available on there if you want to ghostwrite. And it's worse than traditional publishing though, because it's like you turn over all your rights forever and ever and ever, and you can't even say you did this. And so I wrote a story for somebody for $150, and I felt like I was on the right track when they immediately asked for another one, and then another one, and then another one. And so I was like, hey, this isn't so bad. But there's a big leap between writing a 10,000 word short story and self-publishing your own novels, and I just didn't know where to begin or what to do. And then I came across this blog by this little known writer who ran this experiment where name with absolutely no marketing whatsoever, and wrote 6 books and released them and wrote about it in her blog. And she made I think $12,500 off of those books in like the first month with absolutely no marketing or list. What was her name? Ruby Lionstrike. That was her name. And that blog blew me away. Lindsay's blog blew me away. I was like, wow, if that is something that can be done, then I want to do it. And that was 2014. So for most of 14 and 15, I worked on craft. And I started writing an urban fantasy series that I had an idea for. I liked urban fantasy, kind of superhero-ish, because they have powers and stuff. But it was safe because urban fantasy is super popular, right? And I wrote it, and it was okay, but I felt like it was the best I could do, and I really wanted to give it a shot. And so I submitted to Kindle Scout. I know you've had a few people on here who've talked about Kindle Scout, and it got accepted. And I published the whole trilogy, just the first one through them, but I self-published the next 2, and it was all under a pen name because I knew that whatever I wrote first was going to suck. No matter how proud of it I was at the time, I knew it was going to be bad, and I didn't want 5 years later to be like, oh yeah, I wrote that thing. So I don't tell anybody what that pen name is. But getting Kindle Scout was a huge deal. I didn't make a ton of money off of it, but I learned the ropes and got introduced into the community. And it opened a lot of doors, and it gave me a lot of confidence that I could do this thing. And science fiction and superheroes is my first love. I've always loved science fiction. I've been reading it since I was a little kid, and I really wanted to be a science fiction writer. I just didn't know where to start, and I didn't want to do the thing where I just released my book into the void and hope that somebody liked it. And so I was on Kboards back when I used to be on Kboards, and Jay Allen popped on and asked if anybody wanted to write in his Kindle Worlds universe. And I had seen Kindle Worlds before. I kind of knew what it was. And Jay Allen writes hardcore military science fiction. And I was like, okay, this could be good. That's my audience. That's who I want. I want the people who are reading him to read me. And so I did that. And then I was watching a podcast, and the science fiction fantasy marketing podcast. You might have heard of it. And you talked about you were going to launch a Kindle Worlds, and if anybody wanted to be involved, just contact you. And I'm an extrovert, and I can talk all day long to random strangers about just about anything. And so I, was like, hey, you actually helped me on Kindle Scout. I don't know if you remember or not, but I sent you an email saying, hey, I'm writing this book. Do you think you could talk about it or tweet about it? And you ended up tweeting about it. You don't remember, but you guys are always saying about contact authors, don't be shy, and the author community has always been really great about that. And it really does work. If there's someone you like and you want their help or you have a question for them, I have yet to have anybody say, "Go away, don't bother me." It's always been, "Yeah, sure, I'll take a minute and answer your question." So I try very much to be like that. And so I talked to you, and I got your Kindle Worlds, and it was fantastic. It was a great experience. I published the same week. I think we all published together Joe's book, which did fantastic. We had a great cover. And then Rue and I forget the name, Sarah, right? Is it Sarah? She published her book, and they all came out together, and I thought they did great. And I was really pleased with that. So it turned out pretty great.
So it sounds like Kindle Worlds was a good experience for you, though. I'm curious now why you then want to publish superheroes when you maybe kind of got some fans in the space opera, military, sci-fi. Was it just like that was what was calling to you?
Well, Arsenal was a book that I had been working on for a while, since November of last year. And it was the one that I had closest. And there is a military science fiction story in me that I want to tell, my own unique story, but it's sort of like a hardcore story. And I didn't feel like back in April that I was there yet. I took January through April pretty much off to work on craft because I felt like I wasn't where I wanted to be as a writer. And so, and I'm there now, I think. So I started working on it over Christmas break. But I was talking to my wife about this, and she's like, "Oh, do you think people who read comic books don't read science fiction?" And I was like, "Oh, hey, you know what? You're probably right there. I bet you they all overlap." So that's why I went on to write the superhero thing, because my superhero fiction is very science fiction and a lot less fantasy. There's a lot of science in it, so I feel like maybe they overlap a little.
Yeah, if you just go to a comic convention, you'll discover that apparently sci-fi and comics have a pretty big overlap because, boy, oh boy, they'll show off all of the sci-fi stuff as first look stuff at comic book conventions. But talking about Kindle Worlds for a minute, when you're working in someone else's setting, as you would be in the Kindle Worlds, do you prefer using the pre-existing characters that the originator of the setting created, or do you like creating your own characters within that setting?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because when I was a kid, I wasn't aware of any fan fiction. So I never really got to read any fan fiction, but I am like, besides Spider-Man, I think Star Trek is probably my second biggest influence. I'm a huge Trekkie, original Star Trek, Captain Kirk all the way. And I love that universe. I read all the books. You had Kevin J. Anderson on here, and I was so excited because he wrote a ton of Star Trek books. I don't know if that's where he got to start, but that was the first time I ever read his books, and he wrote several of my favorites. And when I was a kid, I was in high school, I was like, I want to do that. So I would write Star Trek stories, but I didn't feel like I could ever do Captain Kirk justice. So I didn't mess around with anybody else's characters. I made my own and did my best to try to make them cool like Captain Kirk, but without being Captain Kirk. So when I started writing Kindle Worlds, I've never written fan fiction before, in the sense of writing other people's characters. So when it came to Kindle Worlds, I was like, well, I kind of want to make my own characters. So when I wrote for Jay Allen's Crimson Worlds, I made a Marine sniper, and I based her off of this guy named Jack Coughlin, who was the most decorated U.S. Marine sniper that we've had. And I read his book called Shooter, and it was a really great book. If you want to learn about snipers, that's the book to read. And so I kind of based her off of him and gave it like a scenario where lots of people died, and she was like the sole survivor. And it was great. And it was my character, so I felt like I could do whatever I wanted with her. And then Lindsay's Universe, I love those books, by the way. Your science fiction books are fantastic. Let me just fanboy here for a second, because they're amazing. She created such a great world, and it felt so much like Star Wars and Firefly that I felt like I could do anything I wanted. And so the idea of doing like a prison break scenario always really appealed to me, but I didn't want to use any of her characters, because her characters, when I read a book, the characters that I love become sacrosanct, and I don't want to mess them up. So I made my own characters. And yeah, one of them is a cyborg, and yeah, one of them is a pilot. But they're not her characters. They're not even clones of her characters. They're my own original characters. It's just that just so happens that my favorite part of Star Wars is X-Wing fighters. And, cyborgs are always the coolest thing ever.
Now, you and I are similar in that regard. When I wrote in her setting, I made my own characters as well. How do you feel like particularly for Kindle Worlds, where people are reading Kindle Worlds because they like the original setting? How do you feel that that satisfies the audience?
You know, it's a little tricky because I didn't really know going in if that was going to fly. Because why do people read Kindle Worlds? Do they read it for the world, or do they read it for the audience, the characters? So it's difficult, but I figured I would take a chance on using her world to introduce characters, because really, ultimately, if I were to ask you who your favorite D&D character is, would you say the Forgotten Realms, or would you say Driz Duerden? You know, if I asked you who your favorite Star Trek character is, would it be the Federation, or would it be Captain Kirk? So ultimately, characters are what people remember, and so I used her world to introduce people to my characters. And I figured if I could nail character good enough, then people would remember the characters and think, oh, hey, that's an author I want to follow.
I do imagine it would be really challenging to write somebody else's characters. Although I would love to try it. If Star Trek or like Stargate SG-1 ever accepted me, it'd have to be something that you're really steeped in and super familiar with. Because I've looked at the Kindle Worlds things just for kicks, and it's never been authors that I've actually read. So I'd have to like be a huge fan first, and then it would be fun, I think. But
Yeah,
yeah,
if the producers of Star Trek want me to save Star Trek, by all means, come talk to me, and I will get it back on the right track. Star Wars apparently is a lost hope, but Star Trek I could do.
I haven't seen the new Star Wars yet, but I've heard some
Don't read my
things.
review.
All right. Well, I love that you got your start kind of like on Upwork and just really practicing and honing the craft and stuff. I'm actually surprised somebody paid you $150 because I remember like I used to hire people to write SEO friendly articles like 15 years ago, and it'd be like the going rate was about $5, for like 1,000-word article. It wasn't any money that anybody could actually live on if they were in a country where there's higher cost of living.
Well, the guy who hired me was in England, and I was just like, how is he possibly making money off of these 10,000-word short stories? He wanted my draft as soon as they were done, too. It wasn't a matter of you edit it and clean it up. And he's like, as soon as you're done, I have other people who edit it. So clearly he paid people to edit it. And part of what got me and my wife, Rebecca, encouraged us to do this, because we're a team, and she does all my covers, and we talk about story together all the time. I'm going to drop just a shout out to her, vividcovers.com, because she's my wife, and it's she does all my covers. So if you like the Arsenal covers, definitely check out her website. Was that he was obviously making money off of my work. I mean, clearly he was making money off my work, and so we're like, well, let's cut off the middleman here and make that money ourselves.
You weren't like writing some interesting threesome erotica or anything like that, were you? Because I remember there was a while where in the first KU version, where people were killing it with the shorts because everybody got the same $1.35 or whatever, no matter what the length.
It was a little weird. It was romance, which was actually really great because it helped me. I'm a guy, right? So when I write characters and books, the hardest thing it was for me to overcome was writing the nuts and bolts, because as I'm going to be general here, and I apologize if I offend anybody, I don't mean to, but guys, we tend to look at situations as, okay, what is happening, and then we filter all of our interaction with that situation through the what is happening part of our brain. And where women, and again, I'm going to be general, so I don't mean to offend anybody. Some people are different, so just bear that in mind. But most women I've ever met and talked to in my life, when they look at a situation, they filter it from, how does this situation make me feel? And the key to writing, all my protagonists are women. I'm not trying to make a statement with that or anything. I just got bored reading about men because, I have my whole life, and I'm a guy, so I thought, hey, it would be fun to write women. The key to writing better female protagonists was filtering everything through the emotions first before I filtered it through the situation. And that work on Upwork actually really helped me do that.
Yeah, that's actually probably a good tip for people to maybe read and write a little bit outside of your genre, or, just in nonfiction, whatever, to experience different things and learn different styles and different tips. And you're right, the women, it's really about the characters and kind of the emotional connection often. And one of the, if you've written any romance with any detailed scenes, they're always like, don't do insert tab A and slot B,
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah,
curious
you can
if
always tell the stuff that's written by guys because it's all mechanics, right?
Yeah, right. Women can fall into that trap too, though. It's very easy for new writers you're describing, you're showing. You're not telling, you're showing what's happening, and that's what's happening. But as far as the superhero books, you having grown up reading all these comics, did you have any trouble transitioning into novel-length fiction?
A little bit. To me, the hardest part about being a writer was figuring out how I write a book. People can tell you all day long, they can give you writing advice, until the cows come home, but only you know how you write a book. And so I probably threw away 30 or 40,000 words, which is kind of funny because my wife's a writer too, on top of being an artist. And her first novel that she worked on, she threw away the first 70,000 words. And so when I ran to her, I was like, honey, great. It's a great milestone. I threw away 15,000 words. And she's like, oh, that's nice. Because that was one of my problems I had overcoming, was the idea that the first thing you write isn't the best thing you write, and having to rewrite things. And so it was a little difficult for me. I still feel like my novels are a little on the short side. They come in between 45 and 60,000 words. And I don't get any complaints about that. I see them as complaints. I get a lot of 4-star and 5-star reviews. And if anybody says anything negative in those reviews, I'm always like, oh, they didn't like the book. And then my wife would be like, it's a 5-star review. I'm like, okay, only a writer would think a 5-star review was bad. But so I'm trying to get over it. I'm trying to get over myself and realize that, hey, you know what? If my book ends up being 50,000 words, as long as people like it, that's all that matters.
Yeah, that's very true. And yeah, it's definitely a writer mindset to like read a 5-star review and find the one critical thing and be like, I've tweeted about how I'll go on a shame spiral from a good review just because like it has a valid criticism in it. But all right, so on the subject of superheroes, you say like superheroes were, first passion reading, and you write superheroes. Obviously, superheroes are more frequently associated with comic books than novels. Have you ever considered or attempted to make a comic book?
Several times. Yeah, several times. In 2000, we moved to Alaska just after we got married, and I was on the ferry coming up there, and I was like, okay, Jeff, you got to decide what kind of writer you want to be. And I tried to be a screenwriter for a while, and that didn't really pan out because screenwriting's hard. And if you think getting into traditional publishing is difficult, screenwriting is like 10 times harder to get into. You can learn it, but it's difficult to break into the market. But one thing comics and movies have in common is the format of the scripts are very similar. I'll try writing a comic. And Marvel did this thing in 2002 called, I forget what it was called, but basically it was, hey, write a comic and send it to us and we'll publish it. And so I did, and I didn't get it either. But then that gave me the idea about writing a comic. And so I wrote a couple of comics until I wrote a Shadowrun fan comic, and that didn't really pan out. And I found it was really difficult to find an artist who was willing to draw the whole thing, because I imagine artists probably hear it all the time of, oh, hey, I wrote this thing, would you draw it? And so it's kind of like writers. What do we hear all the time? I have this great idea for a book, you should write it. I have this great idea for a comic, you should draw it. So yeah, I tried writing a comic and it didn't really pan out. One of my goals for Arsenal is to, depending on how this year goes, if this year goes as well as last year did, I'll have plenty of money to do this. And that is, I want to do a graphic novel for it. So I have a couple of artists on DeviantArt I found that I just absolutely love, and they do work for hire. And so if I have enough money, I will contract them to do a graphic novel.
It does seem like something that would be really cool. We had a comic guy at the Kristen Dean's workshop on the coast a couple months ago, though, and it sounds super expensive, especially if you want like a whole graphic novel and not just a comic book that you can sell for $2.50 or $3 or whatever. So, and then just as Joe knows, because he's the guy always hiring artists, it seems really hard to get somebody that's reliable and good and fast. Although maybe Rebecca could, if she have any interest in comics.
She actually does, and she does, you know, she does a lot of line art. She's more of the she's she's less of the structured artist. So the whole sitting down and drawing a specific thing day in and day out, she's more interested in finding new things to draw and new paint. And right now, painting is her passion because she really wants to get into. She wants to broaden her market on painting covers. I feel like cover paintings are coming back. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but I feel like people are moving away from the stock art and moving back to paintings, or at least paint overs. And so she works a lot on that. Plus, she has her own job. The Vivid Covers keeps her pretty busy. I was looking on DeviantArt for those artists, and it's so funny how many people are like, "Hey, I want to give you $500 if you draw a comic book for me." And but you can only work on my comic book while you're doing it. And the artist is like, "Oh, your $500 is going to keep me alive for a week, and I cannot draw a 28-page comic book in a week. You need to at least pay me enough money so that I can survive on the time that you're doing it." So the one I saw was, they said 6 months for a 48-page graphic novel, and it was about $5,000. I might try to do a Kickstarter this year if I can do some stuff, and then of course Rebecca's concept art that she does for Arsenal would definitely be part of the Kickstarter. But we'll see how it goes. But yeah, getting artists is expensive, and it should be, because as much time and energy as we put into our craft of writing, they put into their craft of drawing. And it's kind of neat having the experience of being married to a graphic artist, because I can sort of understand the other side of the coin, especially with cover art. There's so many misconceptions about cover art, and then she comes along, and it's great to have somebody to tell me like, "Oh, hey, so this is why this is the way it is when it comes to art."
Yeah, and I agree with you. The illustrations, especially in sci-fi and fantasy, urban fantasy, you still see a lot of the stock photo stuff, maybe with an illustrated background. But it seems like with epic fantasy, you're just really seeing a lot of the epic, because some dragons or some knights or assassins or whatever doing their thing on the cover, and who doesn't love that stuff?
Right.
All right, well, let's kind of move into the marketing side of things. I'm curious if your experience doing Kindle Worlds first, although it sounds like you did this secret pen name even before that. What kind of things did you learn from the launches that you were able to apply to the launch of your superhero novel?
Well, I was telling you before the show about how I like to be on you actually used a great word for it, like I'm on the pulse of the community, and I really like to pay attention, and I like to find successful people and figure out what they're doing. One of the reasons why I wanted to do your Kindle Worlds was I wanted your audience, so I thought I'd steal it. And, it worked out great. And if you go to that, I forget the name of the website, but it shows you your connections to books using like a line graphs and stuff. Almost all of my readers through August or September came from your books. And I started getting emails for Ruby Lionstrike because so many of your readers read her and then would buy Arsenal. So it was great. And so I was paying attention to what was going on, and not just what the indie community is doing, but what the traditional publishing community is doing. And if the audience doesn't know what the Passive Voice is, it's the best website ever. It's an aggregate website for publishing news, and the guy who runs it, Passive Guy, is amazing. And so you can kind of stay on top of the publishing news both here and abroad using the Passive Voice, and then you be part of Facebook groups, and you speak to members of the community, other indie authors, and you kind of see what they're doing. And then you pay attention to what Amazon is doing. And I really thought being published by Kindle Scout, my ticket was punched, because who knows how to sell books other than Amazon, right? And my first book did really well. At one point, it hit 127 on the whole store, for about an hour, which was great. It was super exciting. And then they never put it on sale again. So it was like, I realized very quickly that the people who were doing the Kindle press who were all really nice, great people, but it wasn't like they weren't making business decisions. I felt like they were experimenting. Like, well, let's see what this does, and let's see what that does. And then I noticed what they were doing, what Amazon was doing for Jeff Wheeler, who is their #1 author. He writes epic fantasy, sword and sorcery. I'm actually not 100% sure on the definition of those. I know epic fantasy is Tolkien, but I'm not a fantasy writer. I do read fantasy, but I just don't know all those definitions. But he's their best-selling author, and he's often number 1 or number 2 in the store. And every single month, they give away a Kindle Fire or a Kindle Paperwhite or a book or a series of books if you sign up to follow him on Amazon. And Chris Fox does this really great thing about the algorithms of Amazon and how to make those algorithms work for you. And so I spent a lot of time doing that, but then I started doing the giveaways because I realized if I had 100,000 people buy my books, it wouldn't matter if they were fantasy or science fiction fans. It wouldn't matter. I mean, who cares at that point? 100,000 people. And so combined with the fact that I don't have a lot of money, that turned out to be a really great plan. So every month, starting in January, when I get paid, I give a book away. And the condition is that you follow me on Amazon. And it costs whatever the price of the book is. And you guys did a show where Joe went to New York and talked to Goodreads people. And they were talking about how the sweet spot for books was 2 to 5 books, give away 2 to 5 books, have it last 1 to 2 weeks. And I noticed very quickly that anything more than 3 or 4 books did not generate any additional signups. My average signup is about 170, 200 people. The most I've ever had is 500. The least I've ever had was 90. And it didn't matter if the book was 99 cents or $2.99. Price had no bearing on how many people signed up for the book or signed up to follow me. So what I started doing is finding people whose audience I wanted. If you like this book, you'll like my book, kind of thing. And I focused pretty heavily on military science fiction and superheroes, obviously. So I alternate back and forth. I give the superhero book away and I give a military science fiction book away. The only problem with giving superhero books away, and I don't know if you've been over to the superhero section on Amazon, is there just aren't a lot of them. One of my biggest complaints that I keep hoping Amazon will fix is that when you go to the superhero category, the top 20 are dominated by bare-chested men who look like bears or werewolves, nothing remotely resembling a superhero, which is part of why I think Arsenal does so well, is because I wanted it to scream superhero. I wanted people who were looking for a superhero book to go, oh, hey, that says Full Metal Superhero on the cover. That girl is flying in a suit of armor. There are explosions. Clearly, it is a superhero book.
So if the Bear Shifters wore spandex, would they then qualify as being superhero books or just no man chest?
Okay, so here's the thing. I am learning as I get older that the definition of things evolve and change over time. I'm not as hardlined about science fiction and superheroes as I used to be. However, one of the key components is you go to the dictionary and you go to Wikipedia, it says the same thing. The definition of a superhero is a costume crime fighter. So if you're not wearing a costume, you don't have a code name, and you're not fighting crime, you're not a superhero. I love the Punisher as much as anybody else. But he isn't really a superhero because he lacks one of those components, which I didn't mention, with superpowers. Or some ability, something to affect, something like superpowers, like Iron Man. You know, he doesn't have superpowers other than rich. But his suit is superpowers, you know. So if you got a costume, a code name, and some form of superpower, you're a superhero. Other than that, no superheroes.
All right, I'm just messing with you. I know. There's great frustration all around when the Bear Shifters are in every category out there. But
don't get me wrong, I love shapeshifter stories. So I'm actually a big fan of urban fantasy and paranormal romance. And I think it's cool when the Bear Shifter like goes berserk and rips the door off the hinges and punches somebody in the face. I think that's awesome. I just don't think it belongs in the superhero category.
All right, cool. Now I have to ask you though about these Amazon giveaways, because I tried that when it first came out and I gave away some stuff. And at the time, or maybe I just didn't know where it was, where are you going to see how many people actually followed you on Amazon as a result?
So, okay, so here's the thing. I have about 2,500 followers on Amazon, and I say about because that is an estimate. You can go to, I gotta pull up on my own computer real quick. You can go to Amazon Market, nope, that's not it, Amazon Market Services. When you do a giveaway, it will send you a link, and the link will tell you, hey, this is how you monitor your giveaway. And when you're monitoring your giveaway, it will tell you how many people sign up for your giveaway. If the requirement for them to sign up for your giveaway is that they follow you on Amazon, then you can kind of estimate how many people follow you on Amazon. So last month I did my favorite amazing Spider-Man comic of all time is called Renew Your Vows. And I could probably talk to you for an hour about how Marvel ruined Spider-Man about 10 years ago with the storyline called One More Day, but I won't get into that. But Renew Your Vows is amazing. It's all about Peter and Mary Jane and their kid, and it's set in an alternate universe. And it's my favorite one. It was on sale for like $5.99. An ebook, obviously, not like the actual paper book. So I gave it away on a whim, and I got 500 signups. And I figure if you like Spider-Man comics, then you might try superhero fiction in novel form. So it was worth a shot, and it paid off in spades, I think, with that many signups. But yeah, so once you do the sign up, it tells you how many people have signed up. Now, it doesn't tell you exactly how many people are following, but you can do the math and add it up together and figure out how many people are following you. I am sure there's some percentage of people who immediately unfollow you, that they just want to be in the giveaway. Like there's a lot of giveaways where you like have to watch a YouTube. There's a bunch of different requirements you can do. You can do follow on Amazon, watch a YouTube video, tweet a message, like a Facebook post, stuff like that. And I'm sure there's lots of people who just like go in there and hit the YouTube button to watch the video, mute the sound, and go do something else, and come back and hit the follow or hit the join the giveaway button. But it's kind of a pain to go in there and follow somebody and then unfollow them. So I figure not too many people probably do that. Not for a 99-cent book or a $2 book.
And you're doing other people's books, it sounds like, not necessarily your own when you do these giveaways? I
have done my own, and I've gotten a pretty good giveaways, but mostly it's other people's books. I try to find books where I think, okay, I've read that. First of all, they're all books I've read, and I'll be like, okay, I've read that book. I really like that book. Theoretically, I have my taste in books, so I like my book. And so I think that if I give this book away, they'll follow me, and Amazon will email them a week before my book comes out and a week after my book comes out. So you might buy my book, or they'll see my book when they click on the link and they'll go, oh, hey, that's kind of a cool idea for a book. Or maybe I'll check that out and buy it, down the road. But for 99 cents or $2.99, or even if you buy a couple books and go for $9.99 and give away 3 or 4 books, I mean, you get 200 or 300 people following you. If you were talking about mailing lists that you control, and you could pay $8 to get 200 people who are dedicated readers, because you don't do Amazon giveaways to get books unless you love reading, that's a pretty good return.
Right. And how are you getting the word out? Because I would think if you just send it to your social media, your usual readers, that they're probably already following you.
Right. And that's the best part. Amazon does it for you. When you're doing the giveaway, so on every product page on the US store, and I should preface this by saying that it's a US store only thing. So if you live in another country, you just need to know an author who's in the US store and they can do it for you, or have a friend who has a US account who can do it for you. Because when you say, when you set the requirement to be follow me on Amazon, you can change that to anybody you want. The default is the author of the book you're giving away or the author of the item you're giving away, but you can actually change it and put in somebody's author ID and change it. So I have this author friend, Debbie Cassidy, who writes urban fantasy and paranormal romance, and she lives in the UK and they can't do giveaways. And so she PayPals me a couple bucks here and there, and I do giveaways for her, and it seems to be helping her too. So you go to the giveaway section on the product page you want to give away, you hit the giveaway button, you sign up. You used to have to create a whole bunch of filler text, but they've cleaned up the process considerably to, it went from 4 pages you had to click through at the beginning of the year to just 1 page now. And so it automates it for you. And at the bottom, there'll be a little button that says, do you want Amazon to spread the word? And if you click it, Amazon will send it out emails. If you are signed up for Amazon giveaways, you get an email every morning that shows you what the giveaways are for that day. After about 6 days, nobody signs up for your giveaway anymore. So doing a giveaway longer than 7 days is in my experience, kind of pointless, because you're so far down at the bottom of the email list, nobody is getting there. By the time they get there, they're bored. They've already signed up for 15 or 20 giveaways. So 7 days is about the sweet spot. 2 to 3 books is the sweet spot. And then Amazon spreads the word and you don't have to do anything. But that's a great tool because you can also uncheck that, not check it, and they give you a link, and you can give that link to your people on Facebook or your newsletter list, and you can use Amazon to do a giveaway for your newsletter. So if you want to be like, hey guys, because you don't have to have a requirement to follow me. You can just be like, anybody can sign up for this giveaway. And so if you want to do a little reward for your newsletter, you can do the giveaway, get the link, not have Amazon spread the word, and send it out to your newsletter and be like, hey, you guys, if you want a chance at winning an iPad or whatever you want to do. iPad's kind of ridiculous, but you could, as a reward for being a follower on my Facebook page, or as a reward for signing up for my newsletter, here's a great little extra, everybody sign up, and somebody will win it, and Amazon will do the shipping and all that stuff.
All right, cool. That's a great tip. And I will say, even though I haven't done it since whatever it came out about 2 years ago, and I don't think they had those boxes you could check to have them promo it then. So I'm really excited to check it out again now. But even though I haven't done the giveaways, I put my first book that just came out about a couple of weeks early so I could play with ads. And I didn't realize that they were going to send an email out to the followers a week before the release, which at this point, because it kind of screwed up my launch plan, because I got a big boost, right? Like 400 people went out and bought it, and because I only knew it had happened because I guess I follow myself, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't you? I was like, what is this email? And
it's a good way to know if they're sending out emails on your behalf, is if you follow yourself.
There you go. There's a good reason to stalk yourself. But so I would not do a week-long pre-order again because I didn't actually want that to happen in that case. But if it was for another book and I wasn't worried about the rankings and you just wanted the sales, that would be great. Or just to have it, if they do it the week after you release, that would be great too. I wish that 400 people had been, like during my launch week instead of like, oops, there it is. And then I had nothing else planned for the week. But let me pass you to Jeff. I know we had some questions from Kindle on Kindle Worlds also.
Real quick too, about the Amazon emails, they send out an email a week after launch too. Though it isn't always, you can't always tell exactly when they're going to send it out, but I've had 4 or 5 launches this year and I follow myself. So I, like clockwork, 5 to 7 days before launch and 5 to 7 days after launch, you get an email saying, hey, Jeffery H. Haskell has a new release.
Yeah, a friend of mine follows me, and every now and then he will give me in there, hey, just so you know, apparently you put a book out recently.
And it's also great for the algorithms too, because when people follow authors, Amazon will compare, like if you go to your author page on Amazon, there's a bunch of lists that says people who follow you follow these authors. And so if your book does well, those are the authors they're sending your book out to, like Michael Ciaprano, and oh gosh, what's the other guy's name? And obviously MD Cooper and a couple other science fiction writers are all over my also bots. So they're on my top list of people who Amazon sends emails to their fans to let them know my book is out. I keep waiting for it to catch. I do pretty good. Arsenal launched at 2100 and Unstoppable Arsenal launched at 930, and that's without a dime of other than the giveaways of me spending on advertising. So I keep waiting to turn on the KDP one time and have it be like 1,000 sales and me be the #1 book in the store. That could happen.
Absolutely, and here's hoping it does. All right, so Kindle Worlds question from Karen in the chat. Does Jeffrey think that he needs to echo the original author's tone when writing in Kindle Worlds, i.e., would he write a lighthearted story in a grim universe or vice versa?
Hi, Karen. Maybe. I guess it would depend. Lindsay's world was pretty lighthearted, and my story, A Stand for Honor, was slightly more grim because, one, I was actually dealing with some depression when I wrote it, and so I was kind of in a darker place, which is always fun for your writing when depression slaps you in the face. So the prison story and having my main character be, this grizzled cyborg who suddenly decided that he was going to save this poor Alliance pilot who didn't know what the heck she was doing there. Which is great because in the sequel, Stand for Freedom, she turns around and saves him. So there's some great dichotomy there. But Lindsay's world isn't super dark. I don't remember any torture scenes or even any really swear words or anything in those books. And I haven't read all your Fallen Empire books. I read the first 6 of your original, and I read the first one of your spinoff. But I've been super busy this year, so I haven't got to read as much as I wanted. So I didn't necessarily mimic her tone, but I did pay homage to it. And I think that's really important. I don't think you can go 180 degrees away from somebody's tone because, for instance, if you're writing military science fiction, like Jay Allen's military science fiction is very much, I came, I saw, I conquered. And if you go into a detail, if you want to write in his world and you do a romance story and there's very little fighting and there's very little warfare, you're probably not going to do as well as you would writing a story where you stop for 2 pages and talk about the battle armor or the tactics or the strategies. One of the things I love about writing military science fiction and that people love reading about military science fiction is that you introduce a concept, they use the concept, and then you spend a couple of paragraphs talking about the concept.
Yep, that's true. All right, now I have a question regarding, obviously, particularly with the Fallen Empire Kindle World, that was part of a launch, and so there was a lot of cross promo and group promo stuff, and you can't really count on that for books that you release that are solo. So you find that you had a different release technique for a Kindle World launch book versus your own books that are sort of standalone?
Absolutely. You know, obviously the people at Kindle Worlds, Brittany, handled most of the launch stuff for the Kindle World stuff. I mean, I know some people who did some advertising for it, but I wasn't in a position to really do that. I just let everybody know that I knew on Facebook and stuff that, hey, I have a new book out. And I let my list know. Obviously, I don't have a very big list. I've had really trouble building a list, which is part of why Amazon works so well for me, using the giveaways. But absolutely, Arsenal, there's a lot of back and forth on pre-orders and whether they're good or they're bad, or if you should use them or you shouldn't use them. But ultimately, the decision I came down to was is you get 3 months after the book launches that you stay on Amazon's radar, right? So anytime you can add to that is a good time. So I did a month-long pre-order for Arsenal, and the first couple of days I was getting like 1 or 2 pre-orders a day. By the time it launched on June 26th, I had 191 pre-orders, and I thought that was just fantastic. I wouldn't have gotten those sales on day one. Those would not have been day one sales. Those were sales that people, because I don't have an audience, I don't have a huge audience anyways, those were sales of people who were like browsing the superhero genre. They saw the book, the cover drew them in, then they read the blurb and they liked the blurb. Maybe they read the look inside and then they bought it. And so I got those 191 sales. Yeah, I didn't get 191 sales on day one, but again, I wouldn't have gotten those sales if I hadn't done the pre-order. And so I did the pre-order for Unstoppable and got a crazy 500 pre-orders, which was amazing. I was so happy when it launched, and it was like, I have 500 pre-orders. I don't have 500 people on my list, so it was pretty terrific. And I think it does help your ranking, even though it's not like it used to be, where you get that ranking from day one. The algorithms do an average, so yeah, I don't get a huge boost in my rating on day one, but they're also looking at the last 30 days and saying, wow, okay, 9 people a day bought this book, or 10 people a day bought this book. And so those algorithms are really important, and you get those daily sales in the form of pre-orders. It helps you stay sticky. Now, if you have a huge fan base, like if 400 people buy your book on day one just because they heard about it, probably not as important to have those extra sales. But for me, the pre-orders is definitely the way to go. Clearly, you can't do pre-orders on Kindle Worlds.
Just to be clear, I do like pre-orders for later books in a series, especially if you launched book one well. You might as well try to get those people while they're interested. You know, I think if you're launching a brand new series, that's when it's sort of like you want to get that first week, try to get the sales coming in nice, a lot of them if you can over those first few days, not 2 weeks before you release on accident. Not that I know or anything.
Well, I mean, I don't think you have a problem being sticky. I mean, I watch your launches. Fallen Empires was like under 500 for like 6 months. So, I mean, clearly you get to a certain point, probably you don't have to worry about marketing or anything, but I mean, you have a little bit more flexibility than I do. So I needed that time for people to accidentally find me. So that's why I'm a fan of the pre-orders.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I will say, just because you had success once is no guarantee. You know, it really has to also, something about the blurb and the cover has to kind of get non-fans too. Like your reader base is going to get you some sales for a new series. But then, you know, I've certainly had things where I thought it would be more popular than it was. So I find it very hard to predict. As much as I'd like to say I'm wise, I know.
Right, and past behavior is never indicative of future events. So I try to never get locked in to the, well, I did it once this way and it worked, and so that's the way it'll work for everybody. One of my favorite things to say is YMMV. Your mileage may vary. This works for me. It may not work for you, but it might.
I will have to say thank you for bringing up Amazon giveaways, because while you were talking, I Googled it, and they now have a nice little you can see your history, and it showed me that one of the ones I did that didn't do well was like I gave them a 1 in 75 chance to win, and I bought 20 books. They were like 99 cents, but still. But anyway, only 4 prizes were claimed because like 290 people entered. So make your odds better.
You can turn around and give the prizes that weren't claimed away again.
That's what I didn't realize, and I saw it because I looked at it because you were talking about it, and it says, do you want to reuse that money? And I'm like, heck yeah, I want to go reuse that $17 that's left in there. So
I do sweepstakes so that it's not until the end of the giveaway and then randomly people will win. So it's just as valuable to sign up on day 1 as it is on day 7. And then you get to the end of the 7 days, and then Amazon decides what 5 people will get the books based on how many people signed up, kind of thing.
All right, good tips. And I have to ask, did you launch at 99 cents, or what's your pricing strategy been for these books?
That's a great question, because boy, I went back and forth over this. What should I launch at? And you know, I'm part of that Facebook group that you and I are both in, and there's a lot of discussion about launch prices. And Michael Cooper has a great philosophy on launch prices and sales, and they all make sense. That's the problem. 99 cents makes sense. Full price makes sense. Ultimately, I decided to launch full price, and to take that chance and launch full price. Because like Han Solo, I'm in it for the money, princess.
All right,
Go ahead,
so
Jeff, sorry. Joe. I
almost blanked my video instead of unmuting myself, and therefore there was some panic going on.
It isn't a show unless somebody talks while muted.
Exactly. All right, so now let's talk about superhero for a minute. Thanks mostly to having their roots way back in the 40s through 60s and sort of continuing since then, superhero stories usually have an enormous sprawling storyline. For your superhero series, do you plan for or try to emulate something with that sort of scope?
Yes and no. I'm kind of a discovery writer. I did 3 or 4 drafts of the first Arsenal, because I discovery wrote the whole story and didn't really know what the story was or the character. And so I had to find it. I discovery write to find it, and then once I find it, I try to outline a little bit, though I keep trying to work on my outlining. But yes, I try to have an epic scope. There are things in superhero comic books that are fantastic, and there's lots of like staples of superheroes. You know, the arch villain, something bad happening to your parents or uncle, aliens invading, things like that. And so I try to include all of that in a way in Arsenal that feels organic. One of the big things that I learned this year, craft-wise, was really having a solid motivation for your character to act. Because believe it or not, simply having superpowers does not make you immediately put on a superhero costume and fight crime. You have to have a reason for it. And so one of the great things that I stumbled upon it, but I came upon it, was the idea that my character had to have a reason to put on a suit of armor and fight crime. That wasn't just she made a suit of armor and now she fights crime with it. And so the having that motivation and then using a lot of elements from superheroes, really, the sprawling storylines of superhero comics really helped me develop a world that took superheroes seriously, at the same time kept the things that make them fun. I think audience can tell when you have contempt for what you're writing. And I think the problem most superhero movies had before, I want to say Iron Man, was that the people making them had contempt for them. And to some degree still do. I feel like that's over at Fox, where they make the X-Men movies. They have no respect for the source material. And if you're writing a superhero book and every line is filled with rife commentary on how horrible superheroes is, and I'm going to do it right, then you probably shouldn't be writing in that genre.
Yeah, I think if you can't be excited about some of the classics maybe of your genre, then, there's nothing wrong with writing something else, but maybe you realize you're not writing superhero stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, write what you love. I mean, that's number one. Um, and I love Chris Fox's Right to Market, and I use those principles when I launch and when I do research, because it's just stupid not to. They're great principles. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to write something you don't like. The number one thing you should do is write what you love. And if you love it, it's like when I cook food for my kids, because it's the secret ingredient is love, right? It comes through. You can tell. You can tell when someone loves what they're writing, and you can tell when they hate what they're writing.
So it looks like you released your second book about 4 months after the first one. What did you do to kind of keep book one selling in that time? Did you keep doing Amazon giveaways? And how did you kind of get that second launch? It sounds like you're not like a huge mailing list guy, or maybe you haven't built it up that large yet. So how are you getting the word out?
I want to be a huge mailing list guy, but I have the links in the back of my book, like everybody says, and I have free things that I give away, short stories and stuff like that. And I'm planning on doing more. I said there's a couple of different drafts of Arsenal, and somebody, I forget who, I wish I remembered their name now, mentioned the idea of doing director commentary kind of stuff. And so I thought about like making those other alternate scenes and other drafts available for people to read on Google Docs, where they get my mailing list, they click on a link, and they can go see, like, hey, here's an alternate scene where my main character is in a wheelchair, and here's an alternate draft where she wasn't in a wheelchair. Or here is an alternate draft where it wasn't her parents who got kidnapped, it was just her dad. Stuff like that. So I thought about doing that for building my mailing list, but so far, mailing list is difficult for me. Believe it or not, I haven't done anything to keep them selling. I do giveaways every month. I do one giveaway a month. That's about what I can afford. On average, I don't think Arsenal has gone below or above. What is it? Has been worse than 30,000 on Amazon since I launched it on June 26th. For the first couple of months, it stayed under 7,000, and then it right now it kind of goes between 10,000 and 20,000 depending on the day. Yesterday was a great day. I sold 12 copies of Unstoppable and 4 copies of Arsenal, and it was Christmas Day, so it was like, well, Merry Christmas to me. What's the guy's name? 20 books to 50K. I'm totally spacing on his name.
Michael Enderley.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah, he talks about how you just need to sell 5 copies of every book you write a day, right? So if you have 20 books and you're selling 5 copies a day, you're golden. And Arsenal seems to have some sticking power. It's not sticking like bestseller status, but both Arsenal and Unstoppable have not dropped below 30,000 in the bad way since they came out.
All right. Now, I got a question regarding, like, we're talking about this a little bit, but how far ahead do you plan? Let's just say this way. How deep is your pipeline? How far ahead are you planning releases and release schedules and all that?
Well, I part of my motivation is financial. This is my full-time job. I was going to school when I started doing this, and I realized pretty quickly that I could do this full-time, and so I stopped going to school to do this. So for the foreseeable future, I'm trying to release a book every 3 months at the bare minimum. I have a small press book coming out in January or February. It's up to them, which will cover my February launch. And then I'm working on a military sci-fi, original military sci-fi right now. And then I'm planning on Arsenal 4, which will be called Alien Arsenal, in March or April. So part of it is I don't want people to forget who I am, because I'm nobody, right? I mean, I've been publishing under my name for a year. Nobody knows who I am. And how many times have you read a book and you go, that was a great book, and then like 6 years later, you're like, oh, I read that book. It has sequels. And I really need people to buy and read my books. And they're all between 40 and 60,000 words. So as most of my reviewers say, they're quick, easy reads with great pacing. And so I want people to read one, and then I want them to know that the next one is coming out really quick, that in 2 or 3 months they'll be able to read the next one.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing the shorter novels, especially if that's where your tendencies lie. And in some genres, I don't know about superhero fiction, but that's kind of what's expected. Like maybe epic fantasy, 60,000 words might not fly for some people, but
No, right?
but epic fantasy,
I
you're special in that category.
well, I grew up reading David Weber and Arthur C. Clarke, and they all have huge books, and so I like this big complex about like not writing longer books. At the same time, I don't do everything right, but I'm pretty good with pacing. And so my books seem shorter than they actually are. I actually someone say this novel couldn't have been more than 20,000 words, and they were really mad that they had paid what they paid for it. And I was like, 59,000 words, but thank you for the compliment, because that meant you didn't put it down until you finished reading it.
All right. Well, we've been talking for about an hour. Have a few Twitter questions here. If you want to,
Sure.
we can wrap up with those. And Joe, if you want to chime in too, they're kind of general stuff. Tim asks, how can a new author find a publishing coach who specializes in a genre? Mine is horror.
What's a publishing coach?
Yeah, I like a mentor maybe, but I think I would say just do what Jeff is doing and be on the Facebook groups and pay attention to the blogs and the podcasts out there. It's anybody that wants
find
to,
someone you.
don't let anybody hire you, or don't hire anybody.
Oh
It's
gosh, no!
really,
Don't spend any money.
yeah,
They have that thing in England. I read in the Guardian. It was like, what's the people who help you have children? What's it called?
or like a
There's like a
doula,
special name for it.
doula or
A
something like
doula.
that.
Right?
Yeah.
They have publishing doulas in England, and for £1,000, you too can have a publishing doula. No, find an author you like, find a way to contact them, and I promise you, more than likely, they'll be happy to answer any questions you have, because as much as you like talking about what you do, I like talking about what I do. My wife has to remind me when we go to people's houses, like, Jeff, don't be that guy who's always talking about the book you're writing, because it's on my mind. And so I love talking about writing. I love talking about craft. I love talking about science fiction. The number one subject I think in our house here is storytelling. So yeah, find an author you like, who you want to be like, that, find a way to contact them and send them a message.
Yeah, and I would also kind of look at whoever it might be offering you services and see, are they actually selling books in your genre? Do they understand your genre? Because a lot of the time the people are actually writing in the genre, they're busy writing books, so they're not offering services on the side. But yeah, a lot of people will just answer a couple questions if you email them. And Jeff has just volunteered to do so if you guys have superhero
Yes, absolutely.
questions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I am a fan of the idea that writing and publishing is not a zero-sum game. Success for one of us is success for all of us. And if somebody came along and they asked me a couple of questions and I helped them, and then they had the #1 book on superheroes, I would be thrilled. I want to see everybody who wants to be a writer, who should be able to be a writer. But it comes down to you. You have to want it. You have to be hungry for it. You have to be persistent and not give up.
Definitely. You have to be a little obsessed, I think, with not watch your favorite authors, kind of stalk what they're doing, sign up for their mailing lists, just see what they're doing and try to emulate that to the best of your abilities when it comes to marketing anyway. You have to write your own books, of course.
Absolutely. And they have to be good books, or good enough books.
That does make it easier to market, I hear. But Joy asks, once a writer's made the decision to be an indie author, what do you consider the most important steps to lay a firm foundation for a lifelong career?
That's a great topic, because I don't know if you've noticed lately, but that's been a huge discussion in the indie community is, are we sprinting or was this a marathon? Because there's so many people who are just charging to write as many books as they possibly can, as fast as they can. I would say is don't get stuck in one way of doing things, and keep writing. Keep your mind open to, okay, the marketing, like, what was it, last year in September, when the Kindle Unlimited, just all of a sudden people stopped making money and page views went down, and everybody was really quick to blame Amazon. But if you looked over at Google, the same thing was happening on YouTube at the same time. it was a shift in the market. It's my opinion. It was a shift in the market. And you have to be aware of that stuff. So if you want to be a long-term writer, you have to keep writing, and you have to watch and pay attention to see what's going on and change and be willing to change to do it. Because nothing's worse than somebody who something worked for them once, and so they're just going to keep doing that over and over and over again, even when it stops working, because they're unwilling to change. So be flexible and write.
Yeah, definitely. The more books you get out there, the more shots there are that one of the series will do well and kind of help lift everything else. And it is possible to burn out. There have been definitely some conversations lately because there's so much pressure right now. I feel like everybody's like, you got to write lots of books and then launch 5 of them at once. And, you know,
right?
For me,
thank you for that, by the way. That's all you.
I'm not, I just say if you can do it, do it. It's a strategy, or if you can hold back. But and I feel the pressure too to do that because I see it working so well for other people, the rapid release stuff. So now I'm just like, well, I'm not even going to launch a series unless I have 3 books written. And if you're full time, great. Maybe that's not such a hard thing, but don't kill yourself over it. You can still build up a fan base slowly over time. That was very much how I started. My first probably 3 years, I think I was doing maybe 3-4 novels a year, short story here and there. And that's still pretty good production. But I actually found when you release more slowly, I used to get a lot more fan art and fan fiction and stuff from that first series because there was this unresolved sexual tension, and the books were coming maybe 5 months apart, so people had time to wonder what happens next. And I miss that a little bit when you just knock them out one a month. People are like, I'll just wait and see what happens. So you don't have to do it that way. It's awesome. It's an advantage if you can write quickly, but definitely do a pace that you can maintain. And I find that having the 2 pen names, writing kind of different, still speculative fiction, but a little different stuff, helps me maintain the excitement and be, happy about doing new ideas. I would have a really hard time just writing, whatever, epic fantasy every month of the year. I'm doing 12 this year of the same thing. So, find some variety, find whatever excites you, and don't forget why you're writing in the first place.
And take breaks.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law is a dentist, and he works until he drops, and then he flies to Hawaii for 2 weeks. I can't do that. I'd love to. So what I do is when I launch a book, I take the next week off after launch because you need to recharge. You don't feel like it because you're working for yourself and you're thinking every word I write is another dollar in my pocket, so to speak. And so you end up working 18-hour days for 6 months, and then you I love what Chris Fox said, and then you end up playing World of Warcraft for 6 months because you just have lost the will to go on. So take breaks on regular intervals before you burn out.
Definitely. Joe, do you want to chime in on that? You've been doing even longer than I have, 7-8 years here too.
Well, fortunately for me, by the very nature of the way I write, which is to say I'm not nearly as dedicated as most people, burnout isn't really too much of a problem, but also the rapid release cycle is not a possibility because my books are longer and I write less in a given day. So generally speaking, it is pace. You have to pace yourself. If you're like me, it's sort of automatically paced because you have, difficulty focusing. If you're like, if you're a dyed-in-the-wool workaholic, then you're gonna have to teach yourself to sort of have downtime and have the activities that recharge. Don't stop reading and don't stop consuming other people's stuff because you need to fertilize the imagination and make sure that you're not just retreading old ground. I think that's important too.
Absolutely. I read a lot. I love reading. It's why I became a writer, right? And it's important to not stop reading because you don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that you're the only person who's ever come up with this idea ever. Read wildly, read in different genres, read fantasy, read science fiction, read mysteries. It's all good stuff. And you remember why you love doing it.
Definitely. All right, 2 last questions and then we'll let Joe go to bed, East Coast people.
I can go for another hour if you want.
Okay. Well, we'll maybe 10 minutes and we'll try to wrap it up here.
All right.
And Andrew asks, hypothetically, you've got a third of a possibly unpublishable urban fantasy first novel written years ago, but you're excited about writing a sci-fi series. Do you jump into the sci-fi series or first finish the urban fantasy novel to get experience?
So your mileage may vary. I'm a fan of moving forward. You know, if you watch Luke Cage, but he had that motto of ever forward. The European fantasy is the past. Your science fiction is your future. Write the science fiction. If you start writing it and you feel like, you know what, I'm not good enough to learn to do it yet, then you know. And you can figure out how you're not good enough, and you can apply yourself to do, what's it called? You can practice in a very specific way so that you can learn better to do that one thing, if it's emotion or whatever. So yeah, I'm write the science fiction, see how it goes. No writing is wasted writing.
In this case, I would agree. If it's years ago, you're going to have to go back and reread it anyway and kind of remember what you were doing and get back into the world. And if you're more excited about the new and upcoming project, which we often are, I would say also go for it. But try to get in the habit of finishing things, because it's really easy as authors, especially as beginning authors. We write like 30,000 words or something, then we're like, oh, I have this other idea and it sounds so much more fun right now. So I'm going to jump over and start writing on that. And pretty soon you have all these half-finished novels around. So, you know, if it's old, don't worry about it. But if you're working on something now and getting the urge to switch, I would really try to at least make yourself finish the rough draft of what you're working on before switching. But yeah, after a few-year break, just start on something that's new and exciting to you.
I'm a
Joe,
fan
do
of
you wanna...
finishing. There's this great YouTube video of this admiral giving a commencement speech, and he says the key to success is making your bed. And it's terrific because it means start your day with a success, and you have that sense of accomplishment. Just finish your first book, and then finish another one, and all of a sudden it's really easy to finish books because it's so exciting. And as you're writing toward the end, you get that feeling of like the momentum. And so once you start finishing stuff, it just gets easier and easier to finish.
It does become a habit for sure.
Yeah, I agree that you want to finish things, be certain that you do, but also don't throw stuff away. I have a gigantic pile of ideas and abandoned projects that, like, I'll go back and mine that periodically. It's the fabled bad idea exercise I'll mention every now and then, which has become at this point at least 3 novels, which have usually been bad ideas. But it's okay because they made money and they were learning experiences. Oh yeah, Pizza Dragon is the most recent of the bad ideas to be published, and gosh,
I thought it was the best idea ever.
Paid for itself. But yeah, finish things. If you are more excited about a thing now than you started a long time ago, do the thing you're more excited in, but you can't keep on moving to the more exciting thing. You have to at some point complete something, because actually, you know what I've heard is, like, if you're learning a speech, people have said you have to learn the speech all the way. Like, don't stop and start over when you make a mistake. Finish, go all the way through, because otherwise you'll become very good at the beginning of speeches and terrible at the end of speeches. And it's the same way with writing novels. If you keep on writing the exciting first act and never actually learn to write a second and third act, you're never going to get any better at writing a novel.
Very good point. And with novels, unlike speeches, where if you mess up in the middle and then you just can't remember what happens next because you messed up, you can probably do it. You can probably get away with it in your novel without going back and starting at the beginning.
That's true.
Last question from Benjamin. Say a friend or relative was to start from scratch now. What are 2 or 3 things you would advise them to do?
Write every day. Don't worry about building a platform or an audience, because that's all secondary to the writing. Write every day. Get into a habit of writing, and make sure you're writing what you love. I mean, I don't know what else you can do to build your career other than to write good books. Study craft and watch the market. So I mean, that's kind of the 3 things that you do, right? You write every day, you pay attention to what's going on with marketing, and you study your craft to get better. I don't think anybody who is a successful author sits on the laurels and just does nothing and then writes a book every once in a while, except for maybe Lee Child.
Yeah, I do. I don't know about these people who go play World of Warcraft for 6 months. That wouldn't fly for me. I'm like what Joe was talking about, the person that has to remind themselves to take breaks. Like, I should plan a vacation so I cannot write, because it's going to be a vacation and I'll be with other people. So it'd be antisocial to leave and write. Not that I haven't done that. But yeah, that's good
I was supposed to take December off and ended up taking 6 days off after I finished Inescapable Arsenal, which comes out on the 30th. I ended up taking 6 days off, and then I had just the best idea ever for military sci-fi, and I started writing like 5,000 words a day for like 4 days. And Becky's like, my wife was like, "Oh, so this is your vacation, huh?" And I'm like, "I'm so sorry. I had to do it."
It's hard. It's hard when you love what you do to take breaks. And it's hard too when you see success from writing and publishing more often. It's, it's the little, you're getting a treat every time the bell rings. So you start salivating like, got new ideas. So do you want to give any advice for somebody starting new coming up on 2018 here?
Yeah, if you're starting new, I gotta say, I'll second. Like, I don't necessarily feel like you have to write every day, but you have to have a writing habit. Like, so if you have an incredibly demanding job, then whatever, write when you can write, but write. You start the writing habit. I would say that, especially if you can, once you have a book finished, start the next book while trying to figure out what you're going to do with the first book, because again, writing habit, you don't want to have this thing and then your new job becomes figuring out what to do with that thing. You want to continue writing. But and finally, when the time finally comes to launch that book, have a plan for success. Like, it's nice to well, in case I fail, this is what happens. But when my first book hit really big, I was not ready for it. I didn't have a mailing list sign up in it yet. I didn't have anything like that. So when you launch, have everything in place to capitalize on the event that it is successful. You make a plan and everything for succeeding, but also make a plan for what happens when you succeed.
That's great advice.
And then be okay if you launch that first book and it doesn't skyrocket and become a bestseller on Amazon.
Absolutely.
I know there's so many people out there having success right now, and we all share on the podcast and everything, that can be a little disheartening if you launch. And I've seen people, they get like to 10,000 in the overall store, and that's pretty good for a new author. But they're like, well, that other guy stuck at 250 for months. How come I'm not? And then you get discouraged. But just, I've talked about this before, if you don't have high expectations when you meet them, it's like you win. Like, dude, I sold 3 books today. That's awesome. So I just what the guy said, and then
sitting at 1 million.
Yeah, just be practical. And if you go at it too thinking maybe it'll take me 20 novels, because most people that make a living as an author have a lot of novels out. It's like, it's not. Even if you have some success early on as an indie, and you do happen to have that book that just hits all the right notes, it's hard to keep it going at that level. So just bank that money and be ecstatic that it happened. And like Joe said, capture as many people on your mailing list as you can. But just assume that you're really going to have a lot of books out before you can actually have a real solid, reliable income from month to month. And even then, who knows what the future will bring.
Well, and presumably you love telling stories and you love writing, right? So this is something you should be doing anyways, because time passes, you write more books, and if one hits, great. If not, eventually you'll have 20 or 30 books, and if you sell 1 book a day for each book, that's a lot of books a day.
Yeah, and I've told this story before. When I was getting started, J.A. Conrath was blogging. He was kind of the guy that was talking about indie publishing. And he posted he'd made $100,000 that month. And he posted all the books that sold, like his spreadsheet from Amazon. And, he had like 2 or 3 books that sold a ton. But the rest of the books, they sold like 50, 100, 200 copies a month. And, it's realizing that helps build the income too. Like if you eventually get a backlist and it just keeps selling, so that really helps you just kind of keep at a certain level, and it does grow over time. I told you guys before, like when I started, I had 2 novels that were in the same world, but were not in the same series, not related. And I was so jealous of these people coming out of like, slush that had been querying and stuff for a while. So they had like 10 trunk novels that they could just throw out there. And I'm like, man, it's going to take forever. And, time passes, and pretty soon you've got a catalog of work out there. So I don't know. Do you guys have any last final words of wisdom for 2017 for our listeners?
Don't give up. If I can make money selling books, I'm pretty sure anybody can. So don't give up.
Yeah, things are like always changing, and there's going to be ups and downs. That's something we learned at the Oregon Coast thing. Like, every literary career is going to have ups and downs, and in self-publishing, it's just they're going to come more quickly. So keep working and keep improving. And if things don't look great in the short term, keep in mind that the short term is short term, and they could go up tomorrow. So keep working hard, learning, and writing.
It's actually great to get your big hit later on, because then you've got this whole backlist of stuff for people to to go buy. So, but enough about that. Jeff, why don't you tell people where they can find you online and remind us of the title of your first book so they can check it out.
Absolutely. You can find me online at jefferyhhaskell.com or on Facebook, which I am on way too much, but I love Facebook. So facebook.com/Jeffery H Haskell. Feel free to drop by, ask me any questions. My first book in the superhero series is Arsenal, Full Metal Superhero.
Awesome. I will put the links in the show notes for episode 163 at marketingsff.com. And I'll also link to Vivid Covers, because I don't know how booked she is, but she works fast. I had Rebecca do one for me just a few weeks ago, and it can be tough to find people that right now. And now that we've outed her, she'll probably be booked solid, and you'll never get to get a vacation together to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks.
Oh, worst case, I'll have to go to somebody else for my covers if she's too booked, which would be terrible. But you know,
that has happened to me. I'm kind of reluctant when I find somebody good to share them, because they'll get busy and then they don't have time for you anymore.
She works fast, so it won't be a problem.
All right, awesome. Well, we'll have those on episode 163, as I said. And thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you had a great 2017 and got some good publishing plans for 2018. Next week, it'll be Joe, Jeff, and I will be talking about what we think is going to be happening in trends coming along and whatever wisdom we can attempt to impart. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of the year.
So long, everybody.